Once you're living in the world of a person, having control becomes an important thing, doesn't it? Yeah, because you're separate from the world, you're separate from the rest of humanity, and everything's a threat. If you're identified with your body, anything can happen to it any time, so you have to be careful, don't you? Yeah. And it's not that that disappears. It's not that there's no relevance to that, right? You have to have a piece in the game to play, right? So you don't want to give your body up, right? But you can see it for what it is, right? You can understand that the reality of what you are can't be threatened. The body can be threatened, and it doesn't mean that there is relevance to taking care of the body, because it's the vehicle that you're traveling in the time-space reality we live in, right? But it isn't you. That's the thing. That's the key. And that really is the thing that's really the attachment or the connection that has to get broken for you to be free. Because that is the primary attachment, to the identity of being a person. Isn't just the identity of being a person, but it's the identity of being a person who is in a body. Yeah, so when I have been practicing with one of my teachers up in Ithaca, Zen master, right? In his talks, and he gives talks on Sunday morning. Some of you have logged on to the Zoom to hear his talks. I highly recommend him. But his talks are always focusing on the same thing, and that is to help people to recognize that the default state for humanity is to have the belief that there is a self in this physical form, that there's a self in here, that there's a person in here. Yeah, and so we actually experience the things that are coming in through our senses. Most people think that who they are is up here somewhere, listening to what's coming in through the ears and watching what's coming in through the eyes. And one of the primary emphasis that is taught in Zen is to break that belief. There is no self in here. You can look as long as you want and as hard as you want, you're not going to find the self in there, right? There is no self in there. The only reality there is that you can call a self, that you can relate to as the self, is when you're practicing meditation, is the awareness that is aware of the body breathing. And in the way this is focused on from a Zen perspective is the practice of meditation is the practice of being aware of the truth, and the truth that you're being aware of is that when there is awareness of the physical body breathing, right, the idea that you are a body is not there. The evidence that is there is an awareness of the body breathing. Therefore, you're not that body, you're aware of that body, right? So this is an experiential truth. You're experiencing the truth when you meditate if you do it correctly, because you're experiencing the body breathing and you're not that body breathing, you're experiencing that body breathing. So meditation is a way of practicing breaking the belief that you're a physical body. And so when you're meditating, there is information being transmitted to the mind and the brain, and over time that information will change the system from one in which you are a body and one in which there is such a thing as a psychological entity, right, to the truth, which is awareness is all there is. Awareness is what you actually are. And when you're experiencing that, not only are you experiencing the truth, the information that can change the mind and the brain and make a big difference, right, but you're experiencing what it's like to be liberated from the constraints and the suffering that goes along with the idea that you are a body and that you are a person. So even in the practice of meditation, after you get done practicing meditation, if you find yourself reflecting on the practice you just did with a judgment and evaluation, and this is very common, right? You find yourself reflecting on the practice that you did, or reflecting on your practice, or reflecting on the practices you did all week, or whatever, and the process is one in which you judge it in such a way where you didn't do a very good job meditating. You weren't very successful in meditating. You were allowing your attention to be taken by thinking over and over again. You're just a failure at meditating, right? You were distracted by the noise coming from the other room. You felt restless. You kept thinking about how much time has passed and so forth and so on. And therefore, the practice of meditation was not very successful. And then the question comes up from the mind, well, maybe this isn't for you. Maybe this is not for you. You can try it again later sometime. See, the thing is this, that way of relating to meditation practice is the same way you relate to life, isn't it? Yeah, the mind is a program that's constantly comparing what should be happening to what's happening, isn't it? Yeah, it's constantly comparing what should be happening to what's happening. If you develop an understanding of the truth and of how things really are, then you know when you practice meditation, it's perfect every time. It's perfect every time. It's perfect every time. Because if you judge and evaluate it the way you judge and evaluate everything else, you're not relating to it as a practice. You're relating to it as a performance, aren't you? Yeah, the only way you can judge and evaluate it is that I perform correctly, that I meet a certain standard about the practice of meditation. Yeah, but that's not a practice. A practice has to include your ability for anything to happen. It's just a practice. There's no judgment about practice. Ask professional football players. They practice a lot, right? If when they were practicing, they were judging and evaluating what was happening in the practice, they'd never be able to make it onto the field. They'd be freaked out, right? If you're a professional football player and you're practicing, and on the practice field you miss a pass, and you say, "Oh man, I suck," right? You could never get to the real game. You'd be terrified, right? No. But in the practice, this is where you learn. This is where you refine your movements. This is where you look at things with a particular point of view, but not judging and evaluating your performance. So if you apply that same attitude toward your life is going to be a lot easier life to live, isn't it? Because the reality of it is, by the way, although most people don't relate to it this way, your life is actually a practice. It's a practice. You can't expect yourself to be perfect in living your life. That's naive, isn't it? You can't expect yourself to be perfect in the way you relate to people. That's naive. You can't expect yourself to be perfect in relationship to anything unless the definition you have for perfection is that things are perfect the way they are and things are perfect the way they're not. Then you can use the concept of perfection successfully, right? Because everything is always perfect, isn't it? Yeah. So that's one of the realizations that you can have through the practice of meditation. You can come to see that perfection is not a matter of meeting a standard. Perfection is a matter of meeting things as they are, including yourself, including your mind, including your past, including the future. Meeting things as they are. Well, how are things? How are things? Well, they're the way they are. The only answer you can have in terms of how are things is things are the way they are, isn't it? Yeah, if you answer it any other way, you're creating a judgment and evaluation about it. Things are always only the way they are and the way they're not. And if you can relate to it that way, then everything is perfect, then you can relax. Yeah, the practice of meditation is the practice of dying. Because look at it, right? You sit there, you sit down as a person. Right? So now you're there as a person, right? And then you relax, and then you move attention out of the thought activity to awareness of the body breathing. Now, once you make that shift, is the person who is going to die there? When you make the shift from the thought process to awareness of the body, there's a death right there. There's a death. As soon as you move attention out of the thing, because you have to understand, thinking is how you generate the idea you have of who you are, isn't it? If I ask you who you are, you're going to think, aren't you? You can't answer the question without thinking. Not only can you not answer the question without thinking, but if you start to pay attention, you can come to see that the idea you have about who you are and the way you operate in the world is constantly being generated by your brain and your mind. You know, when you leave this room and you walk out of here and you walk into the hellfire, no, when you walk out of here into the ordinary, everyday world, right? Your mind and your brain is generating this concept about you called the self-concept, this image about you called the self-image. It's generating that. So you walk out of here, and what the mind and the brain starts playing as a program, me, the person with this name and this history and this story, is walking. Isn't that the way it is? And then me, this person with this body and this name and this story and this history, is walking, and all that's in relationship to what's happening. Therefore, if you slow down in front of me when I'm driving my car, you piss me off. Yeah, because the me who is this person in this body with this history, with this attitude, in a hurry, is now being stifled by somebody that's driving too slow in front of me. But in the middle of all that, if you're a meditation student and you've been practicing meditation, in the middle of all that, you recognize that being this person is causing me suffering. And I have the understanding available to me that this person doesn't actually exist. Let me test it. I'm driving my car and something happens and I start feeling annoyed and angry because somebody cut me off, whatever the case may be. But I am a meditation student. So when I notice that anger as I sit in my car, I move my attention out of the thinking to me sitting in the car breathing. If you do that, there's a death right there. If you do that, the upset person disappears. You cannot maintain an upset if you move your attention to a neutral object. You can't maintain the upset because the upset requires thinking, doesn't it? Can you be upset about something without thinking about it? Try it. Try being upset about something without thinking about it. Or do the opposite. When you're upset, notice the thinking about it. Notice the relationship to being upset that has to do with the thinking about it. And the thinking about it, so the way it happens when you're upset is that something triggers you, right? This is all automatic. You have no say-so about it, right? Something triggers you, and what comes up is an emotion, say fear, right? Or anger, right? And then when that emotion comes up, thoughts that are related to that start to run, right? So I feel angry. Oh, who made me angry? What made me angry? And then the thinking process starts, right? And unless you understand reality, unless you know who you really are, that thinking process and the relationship of those thoughts to emotions can go on for a long time, can't they? Yeah, it can go on for decades for some people, right? You ever notice that you get up in the morning and something happens before you leave the house or right after you leave the house? It doesn't have to be a big thing, right? But the way it registers in your mind is, oh man, this sucks. Now you've created a way to be in the rest of the day, right? This sucks. If this sucks, then now I'm in the world that sucks. And so the next thing that happens is, oh yeah, there it is, it sucks. You ever notice how once you're in that negative bias, right? Once you're in that negative, and the brain and the mind has a negative bias, right? It's looking for what's wrong, right? Because it's trying to survive and it has to pay attention to what's wrong in order to survive, right? So it has a negative bias. And the way that generates an attitude, or the way that generates a state of mind and state of being, right? And the way that generates like what it's like to be you is that things happen, and as they happen, if you're in a negative bias, everything that happens keeps contributing to the negative bias. Yeah, so you could get up in the morning and, just when you went to get the milk out of the refrigerator to put in your coffee, or the cream to put in your coffee, and you pushed the door and you went back over to the counter to pour your cup of coffee, and you look back and the refrigerator door didn't completely close, and you go, shit. You are establishing a way of being today when you do that. Then you go to get in your car, you know, and you put or you do what I did the other day. You use your thing to open the car, that opens the lock, and you push it and there's no noise, and the lock doesn't open. And it's like, that's interesting. So I unlock the car and get in the car and turn the key. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. So then that could be another thing. Oh man, this sucks. This sucks. And then something else happens, you know. But you see, now you're looking for what's wrong, right? Through practicing meditation, you can be aware in such a way where you can watch this happen. You can watch the machinery run, right? And you're aware that you're not the machine. That's the thing. You're not that machine. You can watch it run. And even after you have been practicing meditation for a while, it doesn't mean that stuff won't run. This is a big problem for a lot of people. They practice meditation, they study the teachings, and then they say, you know, conceptually I know who I am, conceptually I understand what the truth is, right? But I'm miserable. What's wrong? Well, what's wrong is because when your mind and your brain runs, when those program runs, right, you're still attached to that. You're still referring to it. You're still believing in it. That's why knowing who you are and knowing what the truth is isn't making a difference, because you're not applying it. If you're applying it now I know that when the program is running and the thoughts occur, other than the initial stimulation, that you have no say-so about. It's after the initial triggering, right, that you either let it pass or you keep feeding it, right? So here you are now, somebody cut you off on the way to work. Now you're at lunch and you're still pissed off, right? So the ability to be resilient, the ability after the initial triggering of the emotions and the thoughts occur, if you're aware and present for that, you let it go. You don't have anything to say about the fact that it happens, but you don't have to perpetuate it. You just let it go. And you see it for what it is. You see it for what it is. Therefore, it doesn't have any effect on you. In other words, it's not me thinking, it's a thought that came into my mind. Therefore, I don't have to be affected by it. It's not me feeling angry. No. Anger came up. It was an automatic thing that got stimulated and came up. So I relate to it that way, and I can let it come and I can let it go. How can the death of a person really be a death when there's no person to die? Right? So yeah, it's not really a death, but in another sense, it is a death, right? Because the only possible thing that can die, even if it's only conceptual, even if it's only imaginary, is who you think you are. And so in that sense, it's a real death, right? It's a real death of something that you thought was real. And then you see it's not real. It's no different than, I often use the idea of a mirage, right? When you know that a mirage is a mirage, you don't run toward it. It's as simple as that. When you can see something is an illusion, you no longer relate to it as if it's real. You stop relating to it if it's real. Now, when it comes to death, you've got to practice meditation and you've got to study these teachings and you have to develop understandings so that you're convinced about that, right? Because I can tell you right now, I can sit here and tell you death isn't real and death doesn't exist, right? And that'll bounce right off your conditioning. That'll bounce right off your conditioning. Just like the idea of thy will be done will bounce right off your conditioning, or the idea that everything is predetermined will bounce right off your conditioning, because that violates the program. It violates the program at a very fundamental level, right? That's why through meditation you have to experience the most fundamental reality, which is the ground of being, which is awareness itself. That's the most fundamental reality. It is reality. It is what reality is. So these things are not going to, if you listen to the concepts about these things, in organized religion, in institutionalized religion, when people go to services and so forth, the clergy or the rabbi or the imam or whoever it is, right? They teach the concepts about reality and about who you are conceptually, right? And a lot of times those concepts are turned into stories, so you can understand them, right? But they don't really give you a way to practice something that will allow you to experience what they're talking about. You understand? Yeah, and so that's why you're left just having faith in it, because it's not real for you like an experience. It's something you believe in. Religion is something people believe in, right? Now, but in this practice, there is a practice that you can practice that will have the concepts that we speak of here be real, experientially real, that you actually see what I'm pointing to, that you actually recognize it as reality, and you're able to relate to it in a way that it makes a significant difference in your life. It makes a significant difference in the quality of your life, because you know that the mind, right, it's not what's happening in the world that's a problem, it's what your mind's doing with it that turns it into a problem. Why? Because the mind judges it and evaluates it, right, and relates to it as a person. What's it mean to me? What's it mean to me as a person, right? Because until you get out of that identification with something that's not real, until you get out of that identification with the body and the person, right, then everything's about you, isn't it? This is important. Until you get out of the ego, until you get out of the idea that you are a physical body and a personality, everything is about you. Everything is about you. And when you get out of it, and when you're free from it, when you see things as they really are, nothing is about you. It's completely reversed. Nothing is about you. Why? Because there's no you for anything to be about. Yeah, so everything changes. The dots can start to connect naturally, and you start to see what's really valuable. You start to see what's really important. That's what I was talking about earlier, about this attitude of the poise of a dying man. You start to take on this attitude that you no longer see the relevance or the importance or the necessity or the interest in small talk. It's like, why would I spend my energy on that, right? For the person, that's very valuable, because for the person, that has them exist, right? For a person to interact with other people proves that they're real, right? And for you to have a point of view makes it even realer that you're real, right? But all that stuff starts to fall away, and it becomes like, what really matters? And your energy starts to become valuable. Because as one of the teachers said, that in the ordinary state that people exist in, right, they're bleeding energy constantly. You're wasting energy constantly on useless thinking, on useless behaviors, right? So when you wake up and you see things the way you are, you become much more efficient energetically. You become much more interested in using your energy for valuable things instead of letting it get wasted, right? And so things start to be different. You're no longer interested in participating in conflict because you have nothing to prove anymore. And if somebody does something to you, you can tolerate the experience of it, because the only way you would relate to it any differently is if you thought of yourself as a person. Other than that, there's nothing to be done. There's nothing to prove. There's nothing to fight about. There's nothing to be in conflict about. This is the peace of mind that comes when you practice these practices and you learn these teachings. So when you say goodbye to the body, right, the body, part of that is to understand the reality of time, right? That when you say goodbye to the body, you're saying goodbye to the fact that your existence as a physical body is a flash in the pan. That's gonna happen and be gone very quickly, right? So you don't have time. You don't have time. That's part of the goodbye. You don't have time. You got to let go now. You got to die now. You got to die now. Yeah. So if you understand these teachings and practices, that should be something that you have as a primary focus of your attention. To the death of the personality. And the clarity that allows you to let yourself die as a personality is the realization that when that happens, nothing will happen, because you never were what you thought you were that dies. Nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. The only thing that will happen is you'll experience freedom. You'll no longer be constrained by this fearful little creature that you thought you were, right? You'll be as big as awareness is, and you can experience life that way. But it won't happen unless you practice and make a commitment to these teachings and practices, because you've got to turn the system around. You've got to get this computer up here rebooted. You've got to get new software in here that's related to the truth instead of the software that's related to, these illusions that people believe in and consider to be real. Okay, so keep coming to class. One of the things that has occurred to me recently when I have talked to certain people, right, is that there are people that come to the class and are interested in the concepts and the teachings and the practices, right? But they don't establish a meditation practice that they're doing every single day. And I say that while there may be some value there, until and unless you establish a meditation practice every day, you really don't get it. You really don't get it, and you really won't get the results that are possible until that happens. And it's also a matter of the fact that the mind is using the situation in such a way to avoid the full realization. The mind is using the situation. The mind will let you come to class, let you be interested, let you, practice meditation here, let you watch a few videos, right? But that's about it. And then you'll complain that you're not enlightened, right? But you're not doing what it takes to be enlightened, right? And you're allowing your mind to keep you from the full commitment. So, if you want what's available here, you got to have the full commitment, because the mind and the brain have a full commitment to the lie. The mind and the brain have a full commitment to the idea that you're a person. And when you leave here and interact with the rest of the world, it will say, see, here's reality, The assholes on the highway that are blocking you, that's reality, The people that are in your way are that's reality. The people that hate you, that's reality. So this is not an easy thing to do. That's why it requires a community to support you. It requires teachings to support you, and it requires practices. And unless you do it full blast, unless you do it full blown, it's going to be very limited in terms of what it can produce as a result.